Ray, one of the people in the experiment, is sitting in a chair in front of a mirrored window. Steve starts the experiment by injecting a substance into Ray's bloodstream. Just a minute later, they give Ray the first dose of the drug and start telling him simple jokes. Ray laughs hysterically, even when they replace the jokes with grim facts. His reaction remains the same. The next morning, the routine for the inmates is the same. A loudspeaker wakes them up, and names are announced for participation in experiments. Steve asks Jeff if he's willing to try a new N40 compound, which no one has tried before. Jeff agrees, and they also administer another drug to enhance the speech centers of his brain. This allows Jeff to describe his experience in great detail. After taking the substance that enhances vocabulary, Jeff meets Lizzy and tells her about his walk. However, he can't recall everything due to a side effect that limits his ability to speak. Despite this, he remembers feeling immense love and admiration for everything around him during the experiment. In the evening, Jeff reflects on how he ended up in prison. He and his friend went for a joyride at a party, and the intoxicated Jeff ended up driving. The N40 trials, now called Cupid, continue. This time, Jeff is not alone. Heather, a bold girl, joins him after a few seconds of drug administration. Their conversation lasts only a short time before they engage in intimacy, unaware that they are being observed and filmed. The substance disconnects their minds from internal barriers, and the process ends with the couple confessing their love for each other. Steve instructs his partner, Mark, to closely monitor the subjects after the effects wear off. The couple feels awkward and tries not to talk about what happened. Jeff spends most of his free time with Lizzy and doesn't tell her about the experiments. He avoids Heather the next day when they give Jeff a double dose of Cupid. Instead of Heather, an older woman is in the room, and Jeff is not happy about it. However, once the drug kicks in, Jeff engages in affection with her. After this experiment, Jeff feels uncomfortable working in the kitchen with Lizzy, so he asks Mark to move him. Steve takes Jeff to the laboratory, where he sees both of his previous partners. Steve gives Jeff the choice of which girl he wants to give a substance that causes intense fear and pain. However, Jeff can't choose, feeling indifferent to both girls. In the end, they release the girls, canceling the experiment. On a Friday walk, Jeff tries to call his girlfriend from the night of the accident, but she doesn't answer. In the evening, he spends time with Lizzy, planning a small Christmas surprise for her. When Jeff is back in the laboratory, he sees Rogan, a massive inmate covered in tattoos. Jeff refuses the experiment, realizing that he and Rogan were partners with a female inmate who was supposed to choose between them for the medication. After a moment of silence, Jeff realizes what happened. Heather chose Rogan, and Jeff confirms this with Steve. Steve doesn't argue and shows Jeff a diagram of who is supposed to get close to whom under the influence of the drug. Despite Jeff's complaints, Steve reminds him that being in Spiderhead is a privilege. If he's not satisfied, he can transfer to a regular prison without the hope of early release. Understanding the hint, Jeff calmly sits with Rogan the next time. Steve sends Mark on a break and advises Jeff to enjoy his time on the mainland. Steve decides to take Cupid himself to experience the ecstasy he had seen in his subjects before. The experiments continue, and Steve warns Jeff that they will have to administer dark influx to the girls as demanded by a committee for the purity of the experiment. Jeff tries to explain that he doesn't want anyone to experience the effects of this substance, no matter his feelings for the girls. However, Steve is firm and reminds Jeff of the privileges he enjoys by cooperating. Afraid of going back to a regular prison, Jeff reluctantly agrees to administer dark influx to Heather. Heather starts to cry and panic during the experiment, but the management records the data calmly. Despite Jeff's comments lacking any romantic feelings, an error occurs, and Heather loses control. She gets hold of a sharp object and frees herself from the torment caused by dark influx. While Steve and Mark deal with Heather, Jeff notices the supervisor's lost keys and finds a notebook with records of upcoming experiments and a lottery ticket with the same numbers as the names of the drugs being administered. Realizing Steve is no longer behind the glass, Jeff locks the safe and tosses the keys back without Steve noticing. Steve warns Mark that if anyone finds out about Heather, he'll drag everyone who participated in the experiment down with him. Lizzy participates in the experiments for the first time, and the first thing they give her is darkened flocks. After trying out an experiment, Lizzy meets Jeff in a private place and shares her feelings. Lizzy admits that she's not sure if Spiderhead is better than a regular prison with strict rules. In turn, Jeff opens up to his girlfriend, revealing that on the night of the accident, not only his friend was in the car, but also his beloved girlfriend who didn't survive. He willingly undergoes the trials, hoping to somehow atone for his guilt. Their honest conversation leads to them spending the night together. Steve quickly notices the close relationship between Jeff and Lizzy and decides to use it for his own purposes. In the next experiment, Jeff learns that he must either agree to administer darkened flocks to Lizzy or leave Spiderhead. Jeff refuses, but Steve gives him a chance to postpone the experiment until the morning. When Jeff meets Steve again, armed with Lizzy's personal file, he finds out that the crime for which Lizzy is serving time is already so terrible for her that no amount of darkened flocks can make it worse. Steve watches with pleasure as Jeff adjusts the dosage scale to the maximum, thinking Jeff will experiment on Lizzy. However, Jeff intends to use it on Steve instead. Mark, realizing he has also fallen into Steve's trap, decides to rectify the situation and hands the remote control to Jeff. Jeff receives all the necessary information from Steve and persuades him to open the main exit so that he and Lizzy can leave the prison. But Steve grabs the remote control and administers the maximum dose of darkened flocks to Lizzy, causing her intense suffering. He then smashes his cell phone to prevent anyone from canceling his command. The couple manages to free themselves from the effects of the meds and run out of the laboratory. Steve announces over the loudspeaker that because of the fugitives, everyone else will be sent back to prisons where their comfortable lives will end. Jeff and Lizzy become the target of a manhunt by hardened criminals, including the massive tattooed Rogan, who plan to deal with the couple. Steve tries to escape with the meds because police boats called by Mark are approaching Spiderhead. Steve manages to leave the base and take off in a small plane before the police arrive. However, since his remote control is shattered, meds are injected into his bloodstream in massive quantities. Another release of Cupid induces admiration, and Steve steers the plane towards a tiny rocky island, seeing it as a paradise. Mark, on the police boat, watches as his former boss circles above the sea and then crashes into the rocks. Jeff and Lizzy hijack a boat and manage to sail away before the police arrive. Happy and free, the young couple regrets only that Steve didn't invent a substance for self-forgiveness. And that's how the movie ends.